Good morning. Just going to get everybody in here and we'll start.
Did it just start or is somebody already talking?
No, we're just letting everybody get in. We're going to start in a couple more minutes. We'll start in just another minute or two. We've got just a couple more people in the waiting room that are getting themselves signed in, and then we'll begin. All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. If you've not been here all week with us, my name is Stacy Ward. I am the Director of Family Support for the Prader-Willi Syndrome Association of the USA. Our office is headquartered in Sarasota, Florida, although we have a fully remote team. And I am living in upstate New York. So today we're going to talk about life in the residence and what that looks like and how that looks different when you're supporting individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome. Today, we're going to talk about managing the environment, how to create routine and structure, nutrition and weight management, motivation, individual challenges and growth, everyone's favorite topic, sexuality, how to help people become members of their own community, and then communication. So what does managing the environment look like? If this is a residential program that supports only individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome, in most situations, you can get your Human Rights Committee or the Human Rights Department to approve locking either the entire kitchen, putting on an actual door and locking the kitchen and blocking it off from the rest of the residents, or a marine lock on your refrigerator and your freezer, locks on all of the cabinets. Now, in this picture, we use key locks. I will tell you, people with PWS are very bright, and they can be really slick when it comes to this area. I have seen keys go missing. I have seen people leave keys out, and an individual with PWS substitute out the key to the kitchen. I personally have found keypads where you punch in a code to be most effective in changing that code on a regular basis. So what this doesn't mean, though, is that those individuals with PWS can never go in the kitchen, or they can never have any food related activities. This truly does vary depending on their ability to manage their anxiety and their emotions around the food. So yesterday we talked about creating those assessments. This is an area that we should do that when we're looking at how much access to a kitchen or food somebody should have. Now, for the vast majority of people with Prader-Willi syndrome, utilizing locks or closed doors really is essential to their well-being. The other thing that you can do is use alarms. There are some folks who perhaps have a history of elopement, and alarms on their windows, alarms on the doors, sliding glass doors, all of those can be really helpful. They also can, alert you when something's going on and be used for evil. So let me tell you a quick story that a colleague of mine shares all the time. She was working in a residence that was a sister residence to another program with PWS. And in her program, she was the only one there. She was trying to make dinner, and there was a couple individuals with PWS in her program. The phone rang, and it was the individual with PWS who lived in the sister residence and called and said, "There's no staff here, and I'm not supposed to be alone." So the staff who answered the phone was the only one in her residence, so she couldn't leave. She had that individual on the phone. She's trying to cook dinner, and an individual in her program snuck out during all of that chaos. They went to the store, bought about $50 worth of food, and then, oh, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I can hear you.
Let me just let Nick know that I think it's just him. Oh, thank you, Drew. So they snuck out, got a whole bunch of food, spent about $50 on food, and ate it. Now, any idea how they got caught? The person who snuck out to get the food didn't share it with everyone else. They had planned this together. Now, the sister house where the individual called and said they were there alone, there was no staff there, that was not true. There was staff there. this is an example, although I personally find this hilarious. Most people don't. This is an example of the ingenuity, the manipulation, the creativity, whatever words you want to use that people with PWS can have. But they were all in it together, and it would have gone down without anybody realizing it happened if the one individual had shared all of that food. Thankfully, they did not. And then they found out about the staff were able to find out. But things like that happen all the time. Managing the physical environment. So, oh, just going to let a couple more people in. One of the things I really enjoyed or found helpful was using my overnight staff to prep the meals for the next day. So when you have a fully enclosed kitchen, and in my programs, all of them were, including no windows out of the kitchen, which means you can't see what's going on in the rest of the house. If your staffing ratios only allow for one staff to be there, you have no idea what else is going on in the rest of the program. So if you're spending 45 minutes in the kitchen trying to get meals prepared and cooked, nobody's interacting with the folks who live there. Perhaps the support that they need just can't happen. So utilizing folks on the overnight to help prep all of that and cut down on the amount of time that your evening or day staff have to be in the kitchen is really, it's a great tool. So this allows them to be interacting. Now, the caution here is when you're preparing foods that have a strong odor. So if you're using some spices or some oils in your cooking that really, it just smells delicious throughout the house, that odor might wake up the people who are sleeping. So you have to know your environment. You need to know what the ventilation system looks like, and whether or not, the kitchen's on the same floor as bedrooms, all of those things. But I just like to throw it out there because it is something that can sometimes happen. This also goes for, we talked, I think it was yesterday, about staff being able to eat, in the kitchen, away from the folks if they're not eating what they're eating. That doesn't mean ordering things like pizza or Chinese that have really strong odors that they're going to be able to smell. So when you do those things, when you're ordering in some food or you're bringing your own food, please make sure it's not something that has an odor that's going to waft through the house. And, people are going to be walking around thinking, gosh, that smells so good. I want some. Or what are you eating in there? What you're then going to be dealing with is a lot more perseveration around that anxiety. Managing the physical environment, specifically bedrooms, this is the area of the house that I get the most questions about. So ideally, everyone has their own bedroom with a single function lock. And we should all know that a single function means, you can push the door handle down and it opens, whether it's locked or not. It automatically unlocks when you push the handle down and you twist the doorknob. But the reality is that not everybody has their own bedrooms. Not all programs are large enough for people to not have to share rooms. So we run into some issues with Jane took my coloring book, or I can't find my pencil, so Johnny must have taken it. The taking of other people's belongings, or the allegations that people have taken things. If they share rooms, try to get separate closets if possible, so that they can lock their things in separate places. Also, I think it's super important to be able to teach people how to use a key and a lock if that's not a skill that they have, so that they can lock their bedrooms and be responsible for their own things. So if somebody gains access to their bedroom, it's their responsibility for having not locked their door. And that's no different than if I were to leave my house, I lock it so no one can come in and take things. This is a skill that we should be teaching people, and it allows them to take more responsibility for their belongings. So hoarding. This bedroom is very clean compared to many of the bedrooms that you see that belong to people with Prader-Willi syndrome. What I would typically see is the floor would be filled with newspapers or coloring books or magazines. There's usually some sort of paper thing that people like to collect. And because people with Prader-Willi syndrome are so good at completing puzzles, it may be boxes of jigsaw puzzles or crossword puzzle books. I worked with an individual who cut out the crossword puzzle in every magazine and newspaper that she could find. And she would leave them all over her room. Another individual collect baby dolls. And, you know, it started off as very innocent and just cute. She had a little section in her room, and then it became a little bit creepy. It was baby dolls everywhere, heads sticking out under the bed, a drawer like that nightstand would be open and you would just see part of the baby doll. It became so unmanageable that then there was no longer a clear path to leave the bedroom. And fire safety code for all of us requires you to have a clear path from every area of the bedroom to the door. So from the bed to the door, from the desk to the door, from the closet to the door. I had some folks who really took that very literally. It was just a clear path. The rest of the room was a giant mess. I strongly encourage you not to allow this to become a power struggle, and instead turn some of those characteristics of their anxiety into strengths for this. So when people are anxious, they like routine and rules and structure. Put some rules and structure around what a bedroom looks like. Write a contract for what it looks like. Include pictures of what it looks like. When we tell somebody to go clean their bedroom, my 23-year-old son knows what that means, knows what I'm asking for, knows what that looks like. My 19-year-old son, who has significant executive dysfunction, cannot do that. And that's the case for most people with Prader-Willi syndrome. They need step-by-step instructions. What does it mean to go clean your bedroom? First, I want you to go in and take all the dirty clothes off your bed. Now, I want you to make your bed, and you make your bed by doing X, Y, and Z. You may need to create checklists with pictures around what each of those steps looks like. You should do that with them. And when I say do it with them, if somebody truly has the skill set, the physical mobility to be able to clean their room, let them. When you're doing it with them, you might be folding that same shirt over and over again 13 times while they're doing other things. But what they see is they're getting some one-to-one attention, and they're not doing it alone. It's not do as I say, not what I do. It will go a long way in every step of the way. So if this is somebody who really needs that checklist, how to make a bed, after each step, it's a high five. It's great job. Now let's do ABC. Does anybody have any questions about that piece? Is it something that you guys experience right now in any of your programs where you are supporting people with Prader-Willi syndrome?
Hey, Stacy, this is Drew.
Hey, Drew.
And we have pictures of like what a clean room looks like for folks. And we do implement this for folks with PWS and folks without PWS.
Great. Glad to hear that it helps. The folks that you guys support, do they have their own bedrooms? Or do they share bedrooms?
Our folks typically have their own bedroom.
Yeah, it's really, it just prevents some of the struggles that we see when people share rooms. And, you know, it's no different than when my brother and I shared a room. We fought constantly when we were little over it. You know, we would put tape down the middle of the room and you cannot step over it, sort of thing. So it's not unusual for people with PWS to also struggle. But one of their personality types, or, you know, for many of them, a personality type is being very egocentric, and, you know, it's all about them. They're the most important person. And when you're sharing space 24/7, and both of you feel that way, there's bound to be struggles. Managing the physical environment for the staff. So whenever possible, turn an extra bedroom into a staff office, a place for you to go behind closed doors and get away. If you need 5 minutes to regroup, you have it. I have seen in a world before the things were so much more technologically advanced, and your logs were all paper rather than using an EMR or a system like their app, or whatever that might look like. I've seen individuals in the midst of a tantrum rip up the logs, rip up their goal sheets, all the data that is so important for billing purposes, so staff can be paid appropriately, gets destroyed. So having a safe place to keep that is really helpful. It's also a place that you can bring somebody in to have a private conversation if it's difficult to do that in their bedrooms. Some programs, just based on when the house was built, have pretty thin walls. And if you're having a conversation with somebody in their bedroom, the person in the bedroom next door might come out and say, I didn't know that Johnny was having a colonoscopy on Friday. Why didn't anybody tell me? What's he going to eat? What's that going to look like? Is my dinner going to be moved? So it allows you to have personal conversations in a different place. It also allows staff to be able to ask confidential questions, to take a personal phone call if they absolutely have to. And it gives you a place to lock your belongings. So I know it sounds terrible when I say that individuals with PWS will steal your money or go through your bags. It paints people in a really bad light. But due to the hyperphagia, it's a risk, and some folks will. If their hyperphagia level is one of the higher levels, they're going to check your coat pockets. They are going to look into a bag that's there. They may take your wallet and take out some money. Or what has happened in one of my programs, an individual memorized a staff's credit card number, never took it, but memorized it and was ordering things online using that credit card. So keeping your things in a safe space just prevents that from happening. It's better for everyone all around. Having said that, people with PWS have supersonic hearing. So the majority of their senses are pretty blunted. It takes a lot of extra seasoning and spice for them to really taste it. We find people do really well with like super sour things, and it helps, increase that saliva when you give them sour things. The smell of things that are gross that we might be like, oh, that smells terrible, doesn't affect them. They don't smell it. The vestibular senses they need so much more vestibular input to feel things the way that you or I would. This also goes for emotions. The emotion that they relate to the most is anger. So you may see that they engage people in a way to make them angry to get some of that input, which is why we encourage over-the-top positive things, because then they'll get the input the same way. But the sense that's not blunted or less functional is hearing. There is just, I don't know anybody who hasn't said, my child and the person I support with PWS can hear me whisper something down the hall. So if you're in a kitchen and that's the only place that you have, or if you're in an office, turn on a radio, run the water, do something to make some white noise so that when you are having those personal conversations, they're not as readily heard outside of that space. Money. We talked about the money management assessment yesterday, but I just think this is so important. And I'll share, I'm working with a residence and a family in Pennsylvania, and money management assessments are not something that is required in the state of Pennsylvania, and it isn't something that this agency had previously done. But they had made the assumption that the individual in question was able to manage all of their money because there was nothing saying they couldn't. And that's a great way to look at it. If there's nothing saying somebody can't or doesn't have a skill, then we presume that they do and they can. But this individual was making more than minimum wage at her job, bringing in, a paycheck every week, and then just writing out checks and ordering things that, she sent a $400 bouquet of flowers to her mom for her birthday, and then wasn't able to understand why she didn't then have the money in her account to pay her phone bill. So it was a real life example of just not truly understanding all of the money management skills that we as a team had presumed she had. And that's one of the reasons I just think it's so important. Those life lessons are great, and I think everybody needs natural consequences, but let's let them have them with things that are a little less valuable than this particular case. Money should always be locked up. Money equals food. You use money to purchase food. This I should have mentioned this before. Medication can also be considered food for some people with PWS, and I'm sorry for not mentioning this in the healthcare section of the training this week. So, and it's not necessarily people see the pill or the oral medication as food. What they see is perhaps every time I get an antibiotic, I have to have extra yogurt, or I have to eat in order to take this medication. So also keeping your medications locked up and monitoring when people are reporting, particular illnesses, or working with pharmacies and physicians to get medication that maybe doesn't have to be given with food, is something to just keep in mind. The other thing that I strongly encourage people to do is when they are not leaving their home, if they're just hanging out in their own home, hanging out in their backyard, encourage them to keep their wallets locked in their bedrooms. It just helping them understand that their money needs to be safe, the money that they keep on their person, if they're able to. So you have the money, the petty cash, agency credit cards, in-house funds, whatever you call it, locked in a staff office or in a safe. And an individual maybe is able to have $25 on their person, or they have a checkbook. Keeping those things locked up in their room in a small safe box that they have access to, and maybe staff has a key as well should they lose their key, is a good idea. It will be the first thing that one of their housemates is going to go for if they're able to gain access to their bedroom. Exercise. So this picture is a built-in trampoline into the ground. New York no longer allows you to have these, but I just think they're fantastic. I think, because people with PWS have hypertonia and fall a little bit more easily, or their gait is off a little bit, having a trampoline built into the ground prevents or lessens the risk of injury. But we find that because the vestibular system is so blunted, that people need such a high input of vestibular motion that any way you can build things into their home, into their backyard, where they can get that input by playing and exercising is great. So stationary bikes, swings, trampolines, if you're allowed to have them. I don't know if anybody is as old as I am, but when I was in gym class, we had these little scooters, 4 wheels. It's a square. You would sit on it and you roll through the gym. Those are really great for vestibular motion, and they help with folks who have depth perception issues and maybe are a little bit fearful of standing on a traditional scooter. So they would sit on that and kind of scoot their way around a paved area. Adding basketball hoops and volleyball nets are all great ways to get people involved in playing without using the word exercise. So I strongly encourage you not to use the word exercise unless somebody is receptive to that. And instead just find ways to keep people very active. Dancing is a great way. If you have flowers, have the folks engaged in helping plant flowers, weed flowers, add more mulch. Remind them that this is their home and to take some pride in their home and help them get excited about doing all of those things. Have competitions between other programs. So people with PWS tend to be pretty competitive. So you as a home, as a program together can, pair up with another PWS program and do a step challenge and track everybody's steps for a week. And then the winning program, the agency pays for movie night or whatever, very small prize. And in some cases, it doesn't even need to be a physical prize. It can be something as simple as putting out in the agency newsletter and email to everybody that, ABC group home won the step challenge this week with a picture of the folks who live there. But finding ways to just make it fun. Great question, Nick. So would I recommend non-edible over edible items? It varies. I had one program where we grew a beautiful garden and we picked the lettuce, the tomatoes, and the cucumbers and used that for their salad that they had at dinner. The folks in that program did not see the food outside as food. They saw it as their project. And that really helped. Their hyperphagia level was a little bit lower than some of my other programs. And the programs where perhaps the folks living there have a much higher hyperphagia level, it may not be as easy to do something like that. The other thing is if you do have it, just being sure that they're supervised outside so that if they were to, pick a tomato off the tomato bush, you're aware. I would not necessarily then take a tomato out of their dinner. I don't think one tomato is a huge deal. What I would do instead is really talk about the expectation around that. The rule around that is we don't take this. And, if it's causing them stress and anxiety, then we'll talk about how to help prevent them and make them feel safer instead. But that's a fantastic question. So the privacy piece, this comes up quite a bit. So we talked about staff being able to have conversations in a kitchen or in an office, but where do guests sit when they come to visit? Are they allowed to come visit? And please tell me the answer is yes. I understand COVID has changed that a little bit for some programs, and some of the programs that I speak to, they're doing visits outside to just cut down on the number of people inside that perhaps could be exposed should there be an outbreak. But providing people with a safe place where they can have a private conversation with their loved one. I used to personally see when, a family stopped by and, was coming over for lunch or to have dinner with their loved one, that the other folks who lived there wanted to kind of join in all the time. And the person whose family it was sometimes was okay with that, but not always. They would want to just have time with their family alone. So we created a calendar. Now, it didn't mean people could not stop by unexpectedly, but on the calendar, we would say when somebody is coming over and kind of talk about in advance what the expectation was for everyone. So Jane's mom and dad are coming over for dinner, and Jane would really like to have a private dinner with her family. So you guys are going to have dinner at 5 o'clock, just like you always do, in the kitchen at the dining room. I'm sorry, not in the kitchen, but in the dining room at the table. And Jane and her family are going to have dinner out on the patio at 5 o'clock. So just finding a space where they can have a little bit of privacy besides the bedroom. I think that unfortunately, because of the size of programs and, right now the cost of housing is outrageous, at least here on the East Coast. there isn't a lot of extra space to be able to do that. So really thinking through what space can you create in the environment that you already had to allow people to have these private conversations. Outside trash cans. So first of all, I strongly encourage you to have trash cans in the house and outside of the house that have lids. People will eat out of the trash can. They may eat out of a dumpster if you live in an apartment complex that has dumpsters out there. I'll share a story. So one of my programs had two young ladies living in it. It was an apartment program. They did have 24-hour staff. The overnight staff was in a car accident on her way into work and couldn't come. So it was a very sudden change in the schedule routine. The evening staff was then forced to spend the night. In our programs, the overnight staff had to be awake. This overnight staff, the evening staff who was doing the overnight had never done an overnight, had not been trained on the overnight or the morning routine. So she had a fantastic relationship with the ladies. One of the ladies, Susie, said to her, my bus comes and picks me up at 8 a.m. I have to be down there at 7:55. And they were in the third floor of this apartment complex. Staff said, great. Gave her lunch, high-fived her, have a great day. I'm not going to be here when you come back today. Somebody else is going to work my shift so I can get some rest, did the whole, the thing. Susie went outside to wait for the bus. The staff ended up covering that whole week of overnights because it seemingly went so well. And the staff who had been in the accident was unable to come to work that week. On the fourth day, the maintenance manager of the complex called me and said, I'm pretty sure that the woman who lives in apartment 5A has been in the dumpster every morning. We're getting calls from other residents in the complex asking why the police and the crime lab are going through the dumpster every morning. So I went out to look and realized that it looks like the lady who lives in your program. And I was perplexed for a second. Why would you think the police are there? And then it dawned on me that Susie's mother works for the New York State Police in the lab, the crime lab, and has a jacket that said crime lab across the back. Now, I laugh about this a lot now. At the time, it was devastating to me. It was devastating to my staff. She could have died any one of those days. Her bus didn't actually come until 8:30 every day. So she had 35 minutes where she was eating out of the dumpster. And the protocol is actually that staff stand on the outside balcony and watch her walk down and get on her bus. She's never supposed to be out of sight. It's just one of those things that happen. So trying to think through all of the possible scenarios is really just what I'd like to encourage you guys to do. If you have a structure like this one in the picture, put a lock on it. It just prevents them from getting in. If that's something that you can do. Routine and structure. Short little plug. I love the calendar that we did this year. Each month of the calendar has different pictures of people with PWS who submitted their pictures that they wanted us to highlight throughout the year. So anyway, routine and structure. Transitions are very, very difficult for the vast majority of people with Prader-Willi syndrome. And that can be transitions from the staff turnover. We all know direct care staff kind of turn over very quickly. They're not paid super well. It's a really hard job. I will say it's the most rewarding job I've ever had in my life, but I couldn't support a family on a direct care salary. So transitions, from the staff turnover, but also shift to shift. So from day shift to evening shift, or seasonal transitions, or from activity to activity. All sorts of transitions can be difficult, and which of those transitions somebody struggles with varies from person to person. So things that you can do is use a calendar like this one, visual calendars, picture schedules, planners, and it can be, I used to keep a house calendar and individual calendars that we would put in each person's room. So on the house calendar, when all of the things that we plan together at our house meetings, I'm not sure if house meetings is something that you guys do, but I would run house meetings at every one of my programs once a month. I would be there, the behaviorist would be there, the staff would be there, and the folks who live there would be there. And we would talk through, what did they want to do this month? What did they want to do together as a group? If it was a holiday month, how do we want to decorate? Do we want to decorate? All of those types of things. Are we going on vacation together? What does that look like? Those were the things that would go on the house calendar. We also put staff birthdays on the house calendar and the folks' birthdays if they gave us permission to, and would plan celebrations around those things. So that was the house calendar. In their individual calendars would be things like their personal appointments, any meetings that they had scheduled with anybody else on the team, days that they worked or days that they didn't, if they had day program or special occasion, whatever was important to them specifically, we would help them put on their calendar. For some folks, it had to be as specific as, if you think of a planner that you may use in your office that has, from 8 to 8:30, 8:30 to 9, that kind of planner. For some of them, we would have that for what that looked like. They got up at 6, breakfast wasn't until 6:30, because they needed that kind of visual. That's not something that everybody needs, but if they do, provide it. Chore charts. So in my own personal home, there are chores, for lack of a better word, that need to be done in order to keep the house running and clean. For folks with any sort of disability, this can be a rub because, again, it's staff saying you need to do this while I watch. I find, having them develop the chore chart is much more effective than staff developing the chore chart, and then even putting rules around prompting or how we're going to do those things. Scheduling least preferred before most preferred, especially when it comes to chores, can be really helpful. So if the chore is vacuuming, it's, hey Susie, I need you to hurry up and vacuum, get that done so that I can set the table and we can have dinner. That sort of thing. But also having people pick their chore, I think I said that, but that's really, really helpful for the buy-in. And then recreation calendars. So I've seen an increase in using recreation calendars and coming up with, what's going to happen each day over the last year or so as staffing issues have changed, or the COVID situation has had people locked down in their homes, that sort of thing. It used to be much more individualized, but a program recreation calendar can be really helpful. And that also means that for some reason, if you have a staff who calls in and so you're pulling from another program, they know what the plan is for the night. It's already there, black and white. Does anybody have any questions about this piece? All right, let's move along. Nutrition and weight management. So the individual's caloric or macro intake should be calculated by a registered dietitian in conjunction with the physician. Who is able to actually write those orders apparently is different in every state. That wasn't something I was aware of. In New York, the dietitian can write the order or make the recommendation for the order. The doctor fills out a script and then it is what it is. Endocrinologists can do it. The primary care can do it. It doesn't really matter in New York as long as there ends up being a script. In other states, it needs to come from the primary care physician, or can only come from a registered dietitian, but whoever it should be somebody who also knows about Prader-Willi syndrome, because the metabolism is so different. They metabolize food so differently. So one of the things that we know is there is not one ideal diet for people with Prader-Willi syndrome, but the general recommendation is a low carb diet. Not necessarily a strict keto diet, but no sugar, or no added sugar, and complex carbs. People with PWS metabolize that differently. If you've ever seen brain images of what a brain scan looks like when an individual is on cocaine, and then when they're not, certain parts of the brain are lit up in these MRI images when they're on cocaine. People with Prader-Willi syndrome, when they have sugar, look exactly like the cocaine brain. So there is a lot of, talk in pop culture right now that everybody has that kind of reaction to sugar. The research doesn't support that. But for people with Prader-Willi syndrome, they absolutely do. So we recommend limiting the sugar. Now, where this becomes really difficult is people who are diagnosed later in life, who have been able to have throughout their life these sugar treats, so cakes and brownies and all of those things that, quite frankly, taste good. Telling them no, they can't have that now makes you as the program the bad guy. So I encourage you to look at, with a dietitian, how you can incorporate those things in, if it's something they're used to having, in very small quantities, or how can you swap them out for healthier versions of those things. The menus that are created, whether it's a 2-week menu or a 4-week menu or whatever the cycle is that your program uses, should have input from the folks that are being supported. Now, that doesn't mean that staff should be short order cooks. I do not think it's an acceptable expectation that staff are in a kitchen for 2 hours making 4 different meals for the folks that live there. However, I do think that the menu should reflect the things that people like and dislike over the course of the cycle. Weigh and measure everything. I cannot stress this enough. We all start to eyeball things because we know what a cup looks like, but that's when we start to see slow weight gain creeping up. Measure it, just measure it. And one of the things that you can do to help bring people in and have them involved is measure things, leave it in the measuring cups and have them assemble their plate. But that does 2 things. It allows them to be involved in that process, but also shows them it's the correct measurement. You didn't give them too little, which is what you will get accused of. You never get accused of giving them too much. Johnny may accuse you of giving Susie too much, but never himself. So just measure it. Weigh it. It takes an extra 2 seconds, but it is crucial to maintaining somebody's weight or helping them lose weight. Some programs recommend a daily weigh-in. I'm not as big of a fan of that. I think for all of us, our weight fluctuates too much day to day to really do that. I think a weekly weigh-in is enough. I think it should be tracked either in a medical MR or in somebody's chart, depending on how you use it, and can be graphed over time. I strongly recommend weigh-ins before and after home visits and any camps or vacations that people go on. People tend to become a little bit more lax when they're outside of the normal structure of a group home. And, if you think to your own life, we all do that, but we want to know where weight gain is coming from. And we also want to be able to see if there is consistent weight gain happening after every home visit, how can we together support the family so that doesn't happen? Is it a lack of food security issue, or is it the choices are different? I worked with a family that just frankly couldn't afford to buy large amounts of fruits and vegetables. So this individual was eating more things like ramen and lots of pastas and sauces that were able to be made in big amounts for less money. We as an organization decided to work with the family, and what we did is prep meals in advance for them and sent them with them every time they went on a home visit. Then we knew the individual was getting what they were supposed to. The family felt less shame around the situation. It was a win-win for everyone. And then substitutions and reductions. So a reduction is, say, Johnny ate 3 brownies that he found a day program. Now we need to adjust his calories. What does that look like? That should be approved by a registered dietitian or a nutritionist or a nurse, depending on who you have on your team that's managing those things. And reductions should not necessarily be calorie for calorie. If somebody eats 3 brownies, we're looking at about 1,800 calories there, maybe more. In some cases, that's more calories than somebody's going to get in their entire day. So that's not, you can't swap that out. The recommendation I typically make is whatever the carb is, if they or a starch. So if they have a potato with their dinner or bread, or the vegetable is peas or corn, they do not get that. It's not a calorie equivalent, but it is a swap to reduce at least some of the calories that they're getting. I would also, if somebody gets into an excessive amount of sugar, increase their water intake for the day to help flush their system of that sugar. Having said that, water and beverages are also something that should not be unlimited. So there is this thing called water intoxication. And if there's any athletes or runners in the group today, you'll know what this is. It's when you ingest more water than, it's for runners, you sweat out all your electrolytes, but you're just ingesting water. Water doesn't have electrolytes, so it throws off your everything. You become dizzy, you can pass out, all sorts of issues. This also happens with people with PWS. So your electrolytes get managed by the amount or the types of foods and things that you put in your body. If you're on a restricted diet, the way many people with PWS are, very limited in calories, the amount of fluids they need also is a little bit less. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're looking at trying to increase a little bit of water. Now, having said that, most people with PWS don't like to drink plain water. There isn't really any taste. They're not getting that sense. It's not engaged the way, if they were drinking really sour lemonade might. So finding fun ways to get them to drink more water, infuse fruit in it. For younger kids, we will water down milk so that they're getting some, the calcium from milk that they need, but they're also getting some water. Just play around. I do discourage you though from using things like Crystal Light or things that have a lot of aspartame in it, because that sweetness taste is going to trigger hyperphagia to increase to another level. Motivation. How many of you guys struggle with the folks you work with to keep them motivated in doing things, whether that's being physically active or doing their chores or, whatever it might look like? Do any of you already struggle with this? No? Okay. So internal versus external motivation. The internal is when you feel valued. External could be getting paid. Some folks, I just reviewed a behavior plan last night where the gentleman gets paid $2 for everything he does. If he brushes his teeth, he gets $2. If he sets the table, he gets $2. If he walks the dog, he gets $2. If he takes a shower, he gets $2. He is very motivated by money. He's not someone that really, thank you, Nick, appreciate that. He's not someone who responds super well now that he's gotten money to things like, hey, great job, so proud of you. So finding the balance between helping people feel valued and those external motivations can be really difficult. What you don't ever want to use is food. We strongly discourage it. And honestly, it's the easiest thing to use because we know people with PWS are motivated by food. Now, what I will say is you can be strategic and creative with food. So that creative scheduling, if somebody has a doctor's order where they truly need to be exercising, whether it's, I worked with somebody who rode a stationary bike. And quite frankly, it was like watching paint dry. She moved so slow. But if she finished under a certain amount of time each day, she would be able to take her snack. She got a 25-calorie snack, or I'm sorry, it was 50 calories. And she could get half a cup of carrots and it was like 2 tablespoons of salsa. And she would dip her carrots in her salsa. If she finished her, 3 miles on the exercise bike under a certain amount of time, she could choose a different 50-calorie snack from an array of snacks that was approved by the dietitian. That I'm a little bit more comfortable with because it's still within the same caloric and macro amount. What you don't want to do is offer additional calories or swapping out a salad for, I don't know, mashed potatoes or pasta. They're not equivalent. And I have found, although there's no research supporting this, I'm not sure research has been done into this, but the second we started using other things like getting her nails done as a motivation for things that she needed to be doing, those other things that she was motivated by decreased. Then it was always, wanting more of that external. So it's a slippery slope. I do think finding something that people really enjoy, earning extra one-to-one time with a particular staff, or in my experience, people with PWS always know who's in charge, who the boss is, for lack of a better word. So, being able to say to them, you know what, Stacy, the director of residential services, is going to come over and have lunch with you. If you do this, this, and that, you can earn lunch with Stacy by doing this. That can be helpful too. Trying to find ways to do that don't cost you money, don't cost the agency money, and doesn't cost the individual money. The other thing you can do is really work with families to find out what motivates people, what worked when they were in school, because school systems are constantly trying to find ways to keep people motivated and on task and that sort of thing. So they're a good resource to find what works for individuals, but the motivation is one of the hardest things, especially around things like exercise. I used to require staff to work out with individuals. We as an agency paid for staff to have gym memberships so that if somebody that we were supporting had a membership to the Y, when staff went, they could work out with them. That sometimes can be a motivator for people. Make it a competition. As I mentioned earlier, people with PWS can be very competitive. Please try to let them win once in a while. You don't have to win every time. We want it to be, for the most part, pretty genuine. But if you're losing all the time in a competition, it loses its motivation. So if you are making something a competition, make sure they win once in a while. Allowing choices within the request. So do you want to vacuum or do you want to dust today? Those things are helpful. Again, lots of verbal praise, high fives, that one-to-one attention. Those are all things that typically work for people with PWS. I will say they work for a short time and then you have to change it up. I don't know anybody, and I've now worked with hundreds of people with PWS, where that thing that motivates them lasts more than 2 to 3 months at a time. You can also say to them, what do you want your motivation to be? Here are the things in their array of, reinforcers, for lack of a better word. Choose what you want to work for today. And then maybe every month or every couple of weeks, you sit down with them and say, is this still working for you? Do you want to choose something different? The more you involve them in making the choices, the more they're going to buy in, and it's going to be beneficial for all of you. Communication. So this does not apply to just people with PWS. This is really across the board for all residential programs. But informal communication is essential to smooth operations. So I had a supervisor at one point who felt everything needed to be put in a log. If staff wrote everything in a communication log, that's all they would do their shift. Is there other things that have to be in a communication log? Absolutely. Medication changes, how people responded to certain things, what happened on the shift, what didn't happen on the shift that was supposed to. Those types of things should absolutely be in the formal communication log. But the informal communication, like, hey, Susie went to bed at 10. She normally goes to bed around 9. So tomorrow morning, she might have a little trouble getting up. That doesn't necessarily need to go in the log, but the overnight staff has to know that. Should know that, so that they can be sensitive as they're trying to wake somebody up if the alarm doesn't. That sort of thing. I do strongly believe over communicating is better than under communicating. So I used to say, and I think it's still true in most cases, if you think you're one step ahead of somebody with PWS when it comes to just kind of managing their schedule and food security and all of those fun things, you're already 2 steps behind. They are thinking about these things 24 hours a day. That's what hyperphagia is. It's not just the ingestion of food, it's the thinking about, the preoccupation. We're just not wired that way. We're not going to be thinking about it. So let's say on Tuesday, they saw that Darlene came in to work and she doesn't always lock the kitchen door. Now they're going to be watching them. It could be a month down the road that they actually get into the kitchen, but they have been thinking about it every second. They've been watching every time Darlene comes in to see if she does this. These are the types of things that you're just not going to be ahead of. You're going to make mistakes. So if you see staff, maybe, hey, I noticed that the door wasn't closed and latched all the way. You might want to make sure that you do that. Just double check it. That's some of that informal communication that you want to be having. You want to have your coworkers' backs all the time. You want to be constantly working as a team and talking. Now, I mentioned earlier that people have like supersonic hearing. So we implemented a few things. So typically we would not allow staff to have phones on their person while they were working. In our PWS programs, we allowed it so that they could send quick texts to each other without having to speak. We also had a dry erase board that was in the office and one in the kitchen where they could write quick notes to each other while they were on shift without. In our apartment program, it's very, very small. So it was really difficult to have any sort of communication verbally that wasn't being overheard. Find those types of ways to also keep communication as high as it can possibly be. So most people with PWS attend a day program or some sort of vocational setting. There's more and more people who are getting the opportunity to have paid employment, and many, many more have the skills to have paid employment. The struggle comes as job coaching fades out and food security isn't there. But whatever the setting is, using a single point of contact with them can be really helpful. You might have 12 staff in your residential program and there might be 40 staff at the day program or the voc setting that this person's in. There's too many people to be sure communication is always happening the way it should be. So having a single point of contact, it could be an email thread, it can be through text, however you want to do that, but making sure that communication is going back and forth. The things that you absolutely want to be sure that you're communicating are things around food. So, if you're sending a lunch in every day and they're not getting lunch at the program, which is something I strongly recommend you do, letting them know what that is going to look like. So you could even just send them a copy of the menu so they can alert you if they came in with something that you didn't think they were supposed to have in their lunchbox. Buses, transportation is a great way for people to get extra food. In the school setting, very often the parent of somebody with PWS gives the lunchbox to the bus driver. That's a little bit punitive, or can be viewed as condescending in the adult world. So there are people who need that level of food security, and if they have demonstrated, or there's an assessment that says that they need it, then absolutely, please do that. But if there isn't, other things that you can do are like making sure that the communication is there. Make sure somebody at program lets you know if there was a chocolate pudding in their lunch and that wasn't on the menu, or if they show up and their lunch is gone. That means chances are they ate it between their way to school, the home to their work setting. If something like that happens, please do not give them another lunch. That's the natural consequence. They ate all their food. Now they're not having lunch. Encourage the voc setting to take them somewhere else while everybody else is eating. Give them something different to do, without making it fun or feel as a reward, because you don't want to encourage that behavior happening over and over again. Changes in behavior. So we talked about, I think it was Monday, that people with Prader-Willi syndrome present with behavioral changes when they're sick or injured, rather than the typical signs of illness. So when there's a change in behavior, make sure you're communicating that back and forth, because there may be something medical going on. Any questions? All right. So the communicating with individuals, avoid using things like sarcasm. The vast majority of people with PWS don't understand the nuances of sarcasm. Many people from a social and emotional maturity really max out in those teenage years. So emotional intelligence doesn't continue to grow in most individuals with PWS. Doesn't mean that it can't or it won't, and hasn't in some, but the majority of folks kind of are at that teenage level. And sarcasm can be difficult for them. Other things that can be difficult is, if you have teens or preteens as your own children, you may experience this where everything is about them. Their feelings get hurt really easily. So-and-so was talking about me in school today. That's kind of the stuff that you're dealing with when it comes to communication with them. You must be mad at me based on how you've said something. So utilizing social workers, behaviorists, people who can help really role play scenarios with them, help them even, have conversations with the staff that maybe has become strained, that relationship. Being as black and white yet friendly as you can is really helpful. Maintain your professional boundaries. This is hard in a residential setting, and it's really hard with folks with PWS because they present so well most of the time that you forget that this is a power imbalance relationship. Regardless of the amount of respect you have for the people you support, regardless of how you may truly like them as a person, and maybe if you weren't working there, would hang out with them. But the reality is you're being paid to be there. So you always are going to have a power over them. Maintain those professional boundaries. An example I will use is there was a staff in one of my programs, and the individual who lived in that program, I think I've talked about her a little bit before, but she has a bachelor's degree from Hofstra University in early childhood. She was a daycare teacher, and did very, very well. And the staff had a son with Down syndrome. And the individual was a literacy volunteer through the library. So they had set up some sessions where she was tutoring the staff's son, helping him learn how to read. And the staff, in this individual's eyes, did something wrong with the food, didn't cook it correctly, didn't measure it correctly, something food related, and was very angry. And they had a very, very good relationship. And in that moment, that individual said to the staff, and forgive me for using this word, but this is what she said, your retarded son is smarter than you are. This staff was devastated. She was so hurt and ended up no longer working in that program because it had affected her so deeply. That could have been prevented if we had maintained all the professional boundaries. People with PWS, similar to teenagers, will attack you with whatever they view your weakest point to be. If they don't know it, they can't use it against you. We're all human. We all get our feelings hurt. Not giving them extra ammunition is important. Do people have questions about this? Do you disagree with this? Okay. So becoming a member of their own community. We talked about this a little bit yesterday, but one of the ways you can do that is encourage people to meet their neighbors, introduce themselves. Every time we opened a new residence in a neighborhood, we would have a welcome party, for lack of a better word, where we would invite everybody in the neighborhood to come over. It was a party without food, and we would, just spend some time socializing. The folks who lived in the program could share as much about themselves as they wanted or nothing. It was totally up to them, but anything that was shared by them themselves, not by the staff. And what we found by doing that is people developed natural supports in their neighborhood, and that's fantastic. We want people building more and more natural supports and having people in their lives that aren't paid to be there. You can participate in activities at your local library. So if you live near a library, they very often have different things going on. Outside of just book clubs, they might be hosting art events, or some will hold a paint and sip. You could go and have them bring their own drink. Speaking of drinks, so there is nothing saying that people with Prader-Willi syndrome can't have alcohol. What I will say, though, is they metabolize alcohol differently, just like they metabolize food differently. So if they're not on any medication that would prohibit them from having alcohol, and they choose to, and it's not against any of your own agency policies, I strongly recommend having, a drink over the course of a longer period of time than maybe you or I, or half of the amount of, something that you or I would have who doesn't have those type of metabolism issues. But they could participate in something like that. Use your local stores and your post offices and your banks and the churches and all those things that are there. If you're running errands for the house, anytime you can bring someone with you and have them run the errand and you're the support, the better. So I joked when I said this about sexuality being, everybody's favorite topic. People with PWS have sex. Just like everyone else. They have wants and needs and desires. Now, what we have found is people may be engaging in sexual relationships without the education that's necessary. So they have all of these same, hormones and feelings, and they don't necessarily understand all of them. So I don't know what's in Colorado, but here in New York, we tend to be a very progressive state around some of these things. We over support people, and then we're very progressive around sexuality and that sort of thing. So there are lots of agencies in my area that offer sex education classes and programs for people with developmental disabilities. If there isn't something like that in your area, use your psychologist or your social worker to help educate people around their needs. Do assessments around, what they truly know. There's a research study going on right now around the sexuality of people with PWS. And some of the things that we learned was people who maybe are engaging in watching pornographic videos are replicating what they see, but when asked what those things mean, or the words they hear, what they mean, they don't know what they are. They just think that's what they're supposed to be doing. So the education piece is so important, and education for families as well. So there was a time in the PWS community where the thought was, because the reproductive hormones are not produced at the same level and as they are in people without Prader-Willi syndrome, the folks with PWS would be asexual. They would have no sexual interest or sexual drive. And what we found is that's not the case. They may not necessarily have the opportunities to act on those things, but those who are able to act on them aren't always aware of the risks that come with that. Most girls with PWS want to get married and have children. Really, I don't recommend squashing people's dreams. I do recommend talking with them about what part of those dreams is it that they really want, what's important, and what are those baby steps that you can take to get them there. We know the vast majority of people with PWS are unable to reproduce. There's only been 4 women in the world and no men. So that does not mean that if they're sexually active, that they shouldn't be on some form of birth control to prevent sexually transmitted diseases and possibly pregnancies. But it comes with a lot of talking. It's a lot of talking with parents, because this is different than what they were told, especially the adult population. It's different than what they were told when their child was diagnosed. And it's a sensitive, tough conversation to be having. I don't encourage just anybody to be having these discussions with the folks that you're supporting or with the families. You may really want to, as teams, identify who that best person is, what the message is. And this isn't something that's cookie cutter based on your agency. It's going to be unique to every single individual. The SCAT, sexuality, I don't remember specifically what that stands for, but it's an assessment that's required here in New York that we would need to do to determine, does somebody have the capacity to be holding hands? Do they have the capacity to kiss? Do they have the capacity for, over the clothing touching, under the clothing, full intercourse, oral sex? All of those things are in this assessment. And some people are assessed to do none of it, and some people are assessed at having the capacity and understanding the risk up to a certain point. But those assessments are really, really helpful when you're doing the education and helping people, again, gain natural supports and have meaningful relationships. Any questions on this? Any of you guys plug your ears and not want to think about it?
A question.
Sure.
This is Monica. So how do you go about starting the question? Because it's awkward to some
Yes.
people. And they're kind of like, did you really just ask me that?
Yes. So I take their lead.
Okay.
And this is something that I did in my role at my previous organization. So if somebody was, telling me that they have a boyfriend or a girlfriend or that they really like this person, or we saw that they were engaging in risky behavior. So masturbating in places that they shouldn't, or making inappropriate comments, I would start the conversation typically with, hey, I heard you got a boyfriend. Tell me about him. What's his name? So very casual to start. I would not go in with, here's my scat. We're going to talk about what you can and cannot do.
Right.
Because, unfortunately here in New York, the consequences are very, very strict. So if Jane is assessed to be able to have intercourse and her boyfriend Joe is assessed and is only able to kiss, if they go further than kissing, Jane can be arrested and charged as a sexual predator.
Gotcha.
So we didn't, we wanted to protect everybody in the
Right.
situation, but I would start the conversations very casually. And I wouldn't necessarily have somebody do these assessments and conversations that don't already have a relationship with the individual.
Okay. That makes sense.
Anyone else? That was a great question, Monica. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone have, or do you have a resource for that SCAT assessment, or even what the acronym of
I will
SCAT is?
find it and send it to you. Let me see if I can just pull it up right now. The sociosexual knowledge and aptitude test. That's a mouthful.
Thank you.
You're
You
very
would
welcome.
also mention, like, having a conversation with an individual directly related to the SCAT assessment being maybe too analytical.
Mhm.
Are there any other like templates or resources related to alternatives, or at least like initiation alternatives?
The SCAT is the one I'm most familiar with. There are some others. So one of the things that I liked about the SCAT was when we got to the point to actually dive into the assessment, there was pictures. So for folks who maybe have seen something, or you're trying to describe it and they're not really sure what that means, there were some pictures that we could use. I could use the assessment in lots of different ways with the folks that I was supporting. And I don't necessarily think it was too analytic once we got into the process, but it was definitely too analytic to start the conversation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does. I appreciate it.
And I want to say here, I just found the kit itself is $380 through, who is this through? It's not like the typical Pearson. Oh, Stoltling. I'll put the link in the chat for you guys. There you go. And there's training videos and all sorts of things. The other thing that I would do is talk about consent a lot. And there's a great video out there. You guys have probably already heard it, but it's the Don't Drink the Tea video. Have you guys heard of that? No, okay. So I love it. I actually used it with my own children as they were, in their later teen years. But it's all about, and it's this, British accent where this guy is saying, your friend stops over and they say they want the tea and you make the tea and they fall asleep, you don't make them drink the tea. So it was all of these different scenarios around consent, but using tea as the example. And it's amusing, but it's meant for the disability population. I'm going to see if I can very quickly find a link to it on YouTube for you. Here it is. So I would use that one as well. I would also, this didn't necessarily happen as frequently with folks with Prader-Willi syndrome as some of the other folks I supported, but I would also teach people how to appropriately masturbate, including, washing your hands, washing any products that they're using. All of those things is part of that education piece that I think is so important. Now, the folks with Prader-Willi syndrome, the men themselves, their genitalia is much smaller typically. So when we would have folks who were sexually active, finding proper protection for them was a challenge. So if you run into something like that, you can usually purchase micro condoms from a pharmacy. That was the only place that we were able to find them. Just some thoughts around that for you guys, but the sexuality piece is just right now we are seeing across the board an increase in unsafe sexual behaviors in the PWS community, and all of these online Zoom things that happened because of COVID, although brought people together and people were able to communicate and have friends outside of, maybe situations where they never would have been able to meet people, has been great. But the flip side of that is we see people engaging in inappropriate, really just awful conversations and inappropriate settings. So, we may have, PWSA may have hosted a social session for adults, and people in the chat were, saying just disgusting things they wanted to do to each other without really knowing what those things truly meant. Or there was some women who would get on and start taking their clothes off. And what we found is the need for the education is much greater than we previously thought. And because much of the population, the adult population anyway, is in residential settings, really working with providers to help tackle and educate has become one of our, focus points for the rest of this year and all of next year. So I'm happy to have conversations with you guys, to coach whoever is going to be doing education or assessments, any of those things with you guys offline when we can talk specifics, or you have consent to be able to talk specifics. But this is an area that we see a huge increase in right now. I certainly don't want people to not be able to have meaningful relationships, whether that becomes physical or not, but I do want people to do it in a safe way. And if they're going to be taking risks, to be able to understand those consequences as well. Individual challenges and growth. So this is one of my favorite pieces. If you've met one person with PWS, you've met one person. Not everybody is the same. Not everybody has the same skills. Being able to truly look at somebody's individual challenges and strengths and the things that they want to grow and what they want is so important. You're very welcome, Nick. Thank you. The weight loss really is the easy part when somebody is in a controlled environment. It's just easy. You don't have to think about it. Food is not accessible. They're going to lose weight if they're overweight. Everything else is where the challenge is. So with person-centered planning, you've all heard of it. It's not just a buzzword. It's something that I really think that we need to do a better job of implementing in the PWS world. we get so focused on the hyperphagia and making sure, everybody's environment is so food secure that people aren't able to take risks. They're not able to grow because it might be a little scary and there might be food there. This is where really working together as a team and seeing what is that dignity of risk? Can you work with this person to grow and gain new skills and have new experiences? I just think it's so important. We're just starting to do this in the adult world with folks with PWS. When I first started working with individuals with PWS in 2004, every one of my 6 programs was ran exactly the same way. Almost everybody's community rehabilitation plan had the same goals. Stay within their calorie limit, exercise 30 minutes a day, learn how to take their meds with more independence. It was ridiculous. And over time, we got better with that, but there's still so much room to grow as a field, as providers, and as individuals. So all of you who are direct support professionals, again, best job I've ever had in my life, the most rewarding job. You guys have the privilege of helping people achieve their dreams. This isn't something that you should take lightly. If somebody trusts you enough to tell you what they want to do with their life, listen. Help them reach that goal. Find out more. Engage them in conversations. There's a gentleman I worked with, I'll call him Sheriff Bob. So he wanted to be a police officer, and it was his lifelong goal. If we were in a vehicle driving somewhere, he would hold his hand up like he's talking to into a radio, and red car on the right, speeding. And he'd be talking to the base office of what was happening. He engaged in sheriff play all the time. Through conversations, what we finally learned was the reason he wanted to be a police officer so badly was he loved the uniform. So we got him a police uniform. It was a Halloween costume, and he wore it. Well, we got him several because he wore it every day, and a fake badge that he carried. And he was a police officer. His name became Sheriff Bob. That is what, well, that's not really what we called him, Sheriff something, but Sheriff Bob, and that's how you needed to address him. For him, he had achieved his lifelong goal, his lifelong dream. We never would have known that's what he wanted if it wasn't for the direct support professionals who were talking with him, who found out what it was about that was so important to him. And for some people, it may not actually be the uniform. It could be they truly want to be a police officer. Okay, so maybe they can get through a security guard certification first. What are the steps to help them reach that? The direct support staff are the ones who are going to be able to help find that out, to help them discover what it is. These are not discussions that should only be happening every 6 months in their planning meeting or their ISP meeting, whatever it is that you call it. These should be daily, ongoing conversations. And there's lots of benefits to this. So when you're helping people really do the things they love and grow, and you're maximizing their skills, you're going to see their challenging behaviors minimize. Again, it's a win-win for everyone. All right, before we go on to the last section of the presentation today about working with families, does anybody have any questions about life in the residence? No? All right.
I did have one actually, and you kind of touched
Awesome.
on a bit with when you were talking about like guests and the sort of one-on-one attention and planning for like meals, let's
Yes.
say. it seems like, at least with the one resident I have with PWS, that there's an increased MO for like undivided attention
Very much so.
in general. And I was just kind of curious,
How
are
did-
there ways to like identify that, whether there's an increase in that MO
there
that
was-
might be otherwise
Mhm.
difficult to see? Yeah.
Yes. So I don't know anyone with PWS who doesn't want undivided attention all the time. And it can be exhausting. So I do think when you can schedule it just as part of the routine, that's great, and you should. I strongly believe that even 5 minutes a day from each staff who's working will decrease maladaptive behaviors. But then having an extra special one-to-one, whether it's an outing or it's maybe somebody that isn't working directly in the house but is on the team that they get to do something special with. It can be as simple as playing cornhole in the backyard, eating lunch with them, as long as you're eating what they're eating. Whatever that could be is a huge motivator for people with PWS. They'll tell you who their favorite people are. That's great. Also ask them why, because what I found in my experience is sometimes the favorite people are the ones who maybe forgot to shut the door. Not always, but if you know that there's a weak link on your team, maybe it's a brand new staff who isn't trained all the way yet, and suddenly the individual saying, that's my favorite person, that's who I want my one-to-one with, that's a red flag. So you can put some parameters around who they get to choose as well. But I have found that to be super motivating for people. At the agency I worked at, there was, we were very top heavy. There was a lot of people in that management hierarchy. And those folks who were at like the program manager, clinical manager, director, associate director levels were the people that we would encourage folks to choose as the person that they wanted to spend their one-on-one time with, as their reinforcer. It's not somebody who's in the house all the time. I would caution though, if those people aren't in the house all the time, they may not have the right certifications that perhaps they need in order to be taking somebody somewhere. If there's skip in a play, or I don't know if you guys use skip, but here skip is the strategies for crisis intervention and prevention. If somebody has a skip technique in their plan, I couldn't allow some of the people in that hierarchy to go with outside of the program without staff present because they weren't trained anymore. Their certification was no longer current. So that's some of the logistics around it that you might have to think about. But for me, I found it to be probably the biggest motivator across all of my programs.
Okay, thanks a ton.
Oh, you're so welcome. So now we're going to very quickly just talk about working with families. What I want you to remember is, actually, we'll go over this part first. So we're going to talk about the parent perspective, agency policies, outlining expectations for both the family and the providers, and then just some couple communication tips. The parent perspective. So from the day their child received this diagnosis, parents have been told over and over and over again that if your child eats too much, if you look the other way too long, their stomach is going to rupture and they're going to die. Imagine living with that fear and spending so many years protecting them and making sure that every food source is secure and everybody who comes near them understands, and never letting them out of your sight, and then placing them in the care of somebody else. It is not an easy decision for parents. It's terrifying for them to trust someone else with essentially a life or death situation for their child. And I used to have to remind my staff of this over and over again, because I will also say that The parents of the folks I worked with were the most intense families. And when I think about it from that perspective, it was a no-brainer. Of course they were. Makes so much more sense. It wasn't personal. They weren't upset with me, although sometimes they were, but it really was. It was coming from a place of fear. And when you think about it from that perspective, it's a lot easier to work together. It's a lot easier to be kind and compassionate. Parents are the experts in their child. So there was a time when I worked for the previous agency I was at where I could say to parents, I'm the expert in PWS, but you're the expert in your child. For those parents, their child had just been diagnosed with PWS. I had been working with folks with PWS for 20 years. That's not the case anymore. People are getting diagnosed at weeks old. Parents know more about PWS than I do. So not only are they the experts in the child, now they're also the experts in PWS. We need to learn from them. Their child may be an adult. They're always going to be their child. It's hard to help foster growth in the folks you're supporting when some parents don't want them to grow. They're fearful of what happens when they grow. So continuing to have those growth conversations also with parents is super important as well. Things to think about. Does your agency have policies around weigh-ins? And have you shared them with the family? What are your policies around social media relationships? So can staff be friends with somebody they support on Facebook? Can they be sharing things on Instagram? What is the policy? Do you have a policy? What is the policy around money? If you have an assessment that you need to be doing, do the families know that? Are they informed of the results? Do you have policies around home visits? And one of those policies may be the weigh-in and the weigh-out, weigh-in before and the weigh-in after, not bringing food back from a home visit, whatever that might be. One of the policies that I'm starting to see more and more often is policies around natural supports. And so we, like I said, we want people to have natural supports. If they've developed true friendships with people that they go to church with, are those people able to come pick them up and go somewhere with them without staff present? What are those policies? Communicating with direct support professionals. So there's an agency that I'm working with that does not allow the families to talk directly to direct care staff. They can only talk to people on a supervisory level. If that's your policy, are the families made aware? Have you shared with them the reasons why? I am a strong believer in anytime we have a policy for something, we need to also explain the reasoning behind the policy, not just this is our policy and then shut down the discussion. Sometimes policies are just outdated. As the times change, as technology changes, they no longer apply. Be sure you're looking at why the policy is there. Does it still apply? Does it still need to be in effect? And you only think about that if you have to explain why to someone else. Do you have a policy around gift giving? So this actually varies depending on your profession. So if you have a professional license in something, you may not be able to accept gifts from families you're working with. Your agency may allow you to, but your licensure does not. Be sure, if that's the case, that all families know that. At the agency I worked with, we did have a policy that staff at any level were unable to accept gifts from individuals or families. But what they could do is a family could plan, they would order lunch for the next staff meeting and have it delivered. And then it was something like that, but they could not do individual gifts. So if you have any of these policies or others that I haven't mentioned here, be sure everybody knows them, including the individuals and the families that you're supporting. Are there policies around computer or internet usage? using the phone, completing chores, pick up and drop off times. So sometimes these aren't necessarily policies, but they become house rules. And the reality is when you live with a group of people, any group of people, whether you have a disability or not, there are unofficial rules around these things. So if there's only one computer in my house, my 19-year-old cannot spend 5 hours of his day on that computer when other people need to use it. If there is, this doesn't really happen anymore because everybody has cell phones, but if there's only one house phone in the house and nobody has cell phones and everybody wants to make a phone call, how do you schedule that? What are the unofficial rules around that? And can you make them official rules with the input of the people that you support? Same thing around chores. We used to create some rules, house rules around pickup and drop off when families were taking individuals for home visits or vacations or whatever they may be doing. And the rules were really simple. Unless it could not be arranged any other way, we discouraged people from picking up first thing in the morning when other people may be getting in and out of the shower, getting dressed for the day, just to protect any privacy. Now, we were working with folks on, not walking from the bathroom into their bedroom in just a towel, things like that. And it was really easy to explain to families why we had these rules in place without giving away specifics about people's privacy that we wouldn't want to. And we also discouraged it around meal times because it can be very disruptive. And when staff are running and grabbing meds out of a med cabinet and making sure everything is all set and having families set for, the medications, you might not necessarily have somebody to sit at the table and be monitoring or pacing people eating. So there's reasons to have these rules in place, but being sure that you're communicating them without just saying our rule is. So make sure you're explaining why and working with families if there is a reason that, they have a plane to catch and they need to be there at a certain time. There's certainly exceptions. And that's one of the things that you want to build into your rules is that there can be exceptions approved by a particular person. Put all of your expectations in writing. So we created a memorandum of understanding that before somebody moved into one of our PWS specific programs, they signed and their parents signed. And it included things like the kitchen was locked, the refrigerator was locked, what level of independence they were going to have around that, what the diet order said for calories and macros, what their money management assessment said, expectations around things we already knew. So if they had activities, horseback riding or classes or anything that they were doing and enrolled in prior to moving in, we would put all of that in the MOU. That staff was going to make sure they continued to be able to participate in these things. It was the agency responsibility to now get them there. Anything that you can think of went into that MOU. I will say from a legally binding perspective, probably wouldn't hold up in court, but it forced you to have conversations. And it was something that you could use as a tool to go back to the table and say, this is where we were at, but now this assessment is showing this. Let's talk about this and make sure that our MOU is up to date. Are there particular family traditions? So everybody has different backgrounds, different religions, different ethnicities. What are your family traditions and how can we carry them on for your loved one or with your loved one if they choose to? And this is one of those things that we would also put into an MOU. So sometimes what happens is individuals will go to church every Sunday with their family because they have no choice. But once they're given the choice, perhaps they don't want to anymore. We as providers are not going to force them. We are going to give them the option over and over again, but we're not going to force them to go. We would outline that in an MOU. Here in New York, there's different types of guardianship that cover certain responsibilities. That would go in the MOU. What does your level of guardianship actually mean? How do you prefer to be communicated with? Is it email? Is it by phone? Is it by text? If it is by text, I encourage you to only text on agency phones. If for any reason, and hopefully it never actually happens, if for any reason you end up in a court or a legal situation with a family, you don't want them subpoenaing your own personal cell phones and records. You want it to be an agency phone for that reason. Do you want to be communicated with every day? Only when something major happens? If somebody needs to go to the hospital, do you want to be notified before they go? Do you want to be notified when they get back? What do you want in terms of communication? Also, what is your expectation as a provider for communication from families? This is a two-way street. And being able to talk about that prior to somebody moving in and then ongoing is really great. But if you don't start talking about it, it's really difficult to then jump in a maybe a tense situation. IEP, or in the case of adults, ISP meetings. Do you prefer them to be virtual? Do you prefer them to be in person? Where would you like them to take place? They don't always have to take place at the agency office. It could take place in a coffee shop. It could take place at the parent's home. It could take place at the individual's home. Talk about that. So some of my personal communication tips and things that I learned over the years is to always use open, honest, respectful communication practices. Ask parents for their input and their experiences often. I cannot stress that enough. Ask them often. Share positive information with families. So I think very often we get very, very busy and we call parents when we have to. We tell them when something bad has happened. We tell them when somebody has a medical situation. We don't necessarily call and just say, hey, listen, Jane lost 3 pounds this week and she's so excited and we're so proud of her. Or Johnny completed his security guard certification program today and he passed. We're super proud of him and we wanted to make sure you knew so you could call him and tell him how proud of him you are as well. Be sure you're finding ways to share positive information. I also think you should share pictures. So if you have consent to take pictures of the folks you're supporting, text it or email it to a family and say, hey, tonight we were at the library painting. Here's a picture of Jane painting. This does 2 things. It shows them that their child is actually doing things. So it's not unusual for people with Prader-Willi syndrome or anyone to try to split staff and parents. They never take me anywhere. We never have enough staff to do what I want to do. I never leave this house. Folks I worked with used to say those things all the time. And I'd be able to say, that's not true. Here's a picture. We were at the mall last night, or we went on a hayride. Here she is with her pumpkin. And then I could go back and have a discussion with the individual who was saying that. Where's it really coming from? Why are they saying that? Was it not an activity that they chose? Was it just because they like the reaction that they got from their parent? Sometimes that's all it is. But if you can take pictures, please do them. Parents love them. It shows them that you're actively engaged in doing things with their child. So we have talked about throughout the week that you are going to make mistakes. Every single one of you is going to screw up at some point. It's okay. It's going to happen. Everyone makes mistakes. Be the one who tells the parent that the mistake happened. Don't let them find out for their child. It's going to, even if you had good intentions of calling them and letting them know, them hearing it from their child first is going to make them lose a little bit of trust and confidence in you. So if you can be the first one to let them know, please make that priority. If for any reason you need to share negative or bad, for lack of a better word, news, pick up the phone. Do not share negative news in an email. Now, if you need to have a paper trail, have the phone call, send an email with this is what we discussed, this is what I shared with you, here are the next steps. But have that conversation verbally first. Avoid making assumptions. So, teachers say this a lot, don't believe everything that your kid comes home and tells you about me, and I won't believe everything that they tell me about you. This applies here too. Don't assume that everything that they're saying is true. Verify, and, trust, but verify. Make sure you're not discussing confidential information about your coworkers or other individuals with family members. So if, Susie has called her mom and said, last night, Jeremy wouldn't remeasure my carrots, and I know he didn't give me enough. And mom calls and talks to you and says, can you believe that Jeremy wouldn't do that? I can't believe he wouldn't remeasure them. Don't get involved in that discussion. Say, I am so sorry that Susie was upset last night. Let me look into this and somebody will get back to you. But don't say, you know what, Jeremy's difficult. He doesn't really like to do that. We find he's lazy. Don't have those discussions. And then avoid contradicting a parent's decision in front of their loved one. This doesn't mean that you don't have a discussion with them later, the parent, but do not undermine their authority and ask that they don't undermine yours. It's just so important that you guys always appear to be on the same page. Be sensitive to the parents' concerns. Address what you can immediately. If it's something as simple as, she went to the movies yesterday and I noticed that it was chilly out and she said she didn't wear a sweater. You know what? I will make sure that we always have an extra sweater in the car just in case. Whatever you can do to immediately make them know that you're following up and you take their concerns seriously, no matter how small that concern might be. And if you say something, you make sure you do it. If a topic is emotional, stick to the facts. So similar to how we talked about really maintaining your composure, looking disengaged when an individual is getting upset and their emotions are rising, do the same with the parent. Just turn it off, stay very matter of fact, keep your composure, and just repeat facts. If you're hosting open houses or summer get-togethers, invite parents to come. Have those special occasions that you think about the things that you do with your own family and how can you help the folks in your program also have those experiences and invite their families to participate in them. Refrain from discussing internal agency issues with parents. So this is one of those things that I think happens more often than it should, and you don't even realize it's happening. So there's a new agency policy, or we're short-staffed. Maybe there's not a behaviorist on staff. Don't vent those frustrations to parents, and when they're expressing their frustration, just remind them that you're not the one that they should be discussing that with, and that you have no control over that situation. But the person who can help them is XYZ. Meet regularly. Your communication with the family should not just occur every 6 months. Have regular meetings, have regular conversations with them. They're active, should be, if they choose to be, active members of the team. And then resources. Does anybody have any questions or things that you would like to discuss? I know it's almost 2 o'clock. I thank you all so much for being here. No? Okay. So earlier this morning, I sent out links to the previous recordings. Later, probably tomorrow, I'm going to send new links. They'll work for a little bit, but I realized as I started the recording for this one that our cloud is filled up with recordings. So I need to download them and put them in a different place and then send them to you again. So as long as they're still in the cloud, those links will work, but I will need to resend links from another place tomorrow. Does anybody have any questions before we go?
I don't have any questions, but I just want to tell you thank you. It's been very informative.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Please reach out to me anytime. I love talking
Absolutely.
to providers. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Stacey. It's been great.
Thank you.